Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, April the 9th, 2021, and the light is too bright. So how about that? That's better. Let's talk about woke. Let's talk about woke capital. It's a piece by Jamel Bowie in the New York Times today, wherein he lets us know that he has no idea what woke capital means. It's entitled Republicans' Fake War Against Woke Capital, and woke capital is in scare quotes. And woke capital, it's one of those things, again, the Schrodinger's cat of the leftist mind. If you were in favor of woke capital, it's a good thing. If you are against it, well, you know, it exists or it doesn't exist, and soon enough we'll be told that the phrase is misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theory, more evidence of white supremacy. If they really wanted to help the working class, there is plenty they could do. What is he talking about? Woke capital has to do about social revolution fomented by big business. But superstar columnist Jamel Bowie does not know this. I suppose that's why he was hired by the New York Times. He begins, the Republican Party may not have much of an agenda to sell the Republic right now, but it does have an enemy with which to rally its troops. Woke capital are those corporations that have adopted progressive rhetoric on social issues and use their platforms to support voting rights or back movements like Black Lives Matter. Yes. Standing up against those nasty people who, for instance, don't believe that Black people should be allowed to vote. And who are those people who don't believe that Black people should be allowed to vote? This is what they call a straw man argument. Parts of the private sector keep dabbling in behaving like a woke parallel government. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, told reporters Monday corporations will invite serious consequences if they become a vehicle for far-left mobs to hijack our country from outside the constitutional order. Marco Rubio condemned Major League Baseball for moving its All-Star game from Georgia. Bowie explains to us, to the extent that woke capital even exists, it involves real questions of political economy. Simply put, there are few countervailing forces in American life to corporate speech, corporate money, and corporate political action. If woke capital is a real problem, then the solution is to reanimate those countervailing forces, which is to say, to put life back into organized labor. Again, what? You see, the left loves big business now. Loves big business. It loves big business because the left is all about consuming now. Consume product, don't ask questions, wait to consume next product. Progressive forces and big business are allies now. They are as close as this. As far as organized labor goes, organized labor in the United States, Canada, Britain, and elsewhere turned its back on the working class decades ago. Organized labor now is in favor of open borders. Wait a minute, didn't organized labor used to fight pitched battles against immigrants a little more than a century ago? Oh yeah, that's because they were racist. Oh, weren't all these people brought in from Asia to put people already there out of jobs to lower wages? Yes, exactly. But apparently, organized labor today believes that open borders is not a problem because all these people will be found government jobs. Some Republican critics of woke capital seem to understand the need to put some distance between their party and corporate America. Rubio, for example, has backed the effort to unionize an Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, as a punishment of sorts for the company's occasionally progressive messaging. Yes, Amazon's occasionally progressive messaging. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, largely quiet since he tried to challenge the Electoral College results in January, has also pledged to take action against MLB and the giant woke corporations that keep telling the Biden's big lie about Georgia and election integrity. Hawley said he would soon introduce a trust-busting agenda for the 21st century. None of these things, the unionization of a single warehouse at a single firm, new antitrust legislation, and end to corporate welfare is bad. Yeah, let's see when it comes to the test whether Jamelle Bouie and the New York Times think that these things are bad. If Republicans are truly serious about standing up to woke capital, if this is more than just a messaging ploy meant to smooth over ideological division within the party ranks, then there are a few other larger things they can do. Support the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. Again, apparently woke capital has to do with labor problems, and it is not anything about that. A higher federal minimum wage, no more robust social safety net, no. If woke capital is a real problem, then it's a labor issue as much as it is a cultural one. You are completely missing the point. We know, of course, Bouie says that Republicans aren't interested in any of this. McConnell might denounce actual corporate speech, but he is a major recipient of corporate dollars and a staunch defender of corporate spending in elections. He has already backed off on his comments. Yes, there's a clue there for Jamelle Bouie, if he were clever enough to pick up on it, that McConnell is a panderer. He always has been a panderer. McConnell loves big corporations, but there's a civil war going on within the Republican Party, and I would have thought that someone even as dim as Jamelle Bouie would have been able to see that, but no. He concludes, woke capital also does not actually exist. No, of course it doesn't. A Black Lives Matter advertisement does not make up for the McDonald's just McDonald's, I suppose you could say, exploitative relationship to labor and the environment. Amazon might take a few items deemed offensive off its shelves, but it still relies on overworked and underpaid workers in its warehouses and delivery vehicles. Yes, let's write a column about woke capital and completely ignore what woke capital actually is. As far as the Amazon warehouse workers in Bessemer, Alabama goes, well, according to NBC News, Amazon warehouse workers here voted overwhelmingly against forming a union Friday after a months-long campaign in which labor had hoped to make inroads into the sprawling company. As of Friday morning, 1,798 employees voted against unionizing compared to 738 in favor. If it had been approved, the union would have been the first in the United States for Amazon, the country's second largest employer. Even as the vote was being completed, the retail, wholesale, and department store union, the union seeking to represent the 5,800 workers in Bessemer, said it would challenge the vote by filing unfair labor practice charges with the National Labor Relations Board. It will allege that Amazon broke the law with some of its anti-union activity in the run-up to the election. Amazon was demanding photo ID for people to vote remotely in this, amusingly enough. Amazon is notorious for its treatment of employees, what you might call burn and churn. Its employees are given impossible tasks for not very much money, and they have to quit. They have to quit because they simply can't keep up, or they suffer injuries from the mode of employment. Now, there are lots of jobs that are dangerous to the body, punishing to the body. These jobs typically pay well. The funny thing is, of course, that the left loves Amazon because it makes it possible for them to never leave their home. The idea of one company providing everything in life, they believe that it's a good thing. Thomas Frank has something to say about this question. He begins, one day in March 2015. This is from The Guardian. I sat in a theater in New York City and took careful notes as a series of personages led by Hillary Clinton and Melinda Gates described the dazzling sunburst of liberation that was coming our way thanks to entrepreneurs, foundations, and Silicon Valley. The presentation I remember most vividly was that of a famous TV actor who rhapsodized about the wonders of Twitter, Facebook, and the rest. No matter which platform you prefer, she told us, social media has given us all an extraordinary new world where anyone, no matter their gender, can share their story across communities, continents, and computer screens. A whole new world without ceilings. Frank comments, 6 years later, and liberals can't wait for that extraordinary new world to end. Today, we know that social media is what gives you things like Donald Trump's lying tweets, the QAnon conspiracy theory, and the Capitol riot of January the 6th. Social media, we now know, is a volcano of misinformation, a nonstop wallow in hatred and lies generated for fun and profit. And these days, liberal politicians are openly pleading with social media's corporate masters to please clamp a ceiling on it, to stop people from sharing their false and dangerous stories. A reality crisis is the startling name a New York Times story recently applied to this dismal situation. An information disorder is the more medical sounding label that other authorities choose to give it. Yes, once again, if we disagree with the elite, we are sick. We are mentally sick or physically sick or both. Frank continues, either way the diagnosis goes, we Americans are drowning in this semiotic swirl. We have come loose from the shared material world, lost ourselves in an endless maze of foreign disinformation and right-wing conspiracy theory. In response, Joe Biden has called upon us as a nation to defend the truth and defeat the lies. A renowned CNN journalist advocates a harm reduction model a harm reduction model, as if we are junkies, to minimize information pollution and deliver the rational views that the public wants. A New York Times writer has suggested the president appoint a federal reality czar. Nuke this gay earth, who would help the Silicon Valley platform monopolies mute the siren song of QAnon and thus usher us into a new age of sincerity. These days, Democratic politicians lean on anyone with power over platforms to shut down the propaganda of the right. Former Democratic officials pen op-eds calling on us to get over free speech. Journalists fantasize about how easily and painlessly Silicon Valley might monitor and root out objectionable speech. In a recent HBO documentary on the subject, journalist after journalist can be seen rationalizing that because social media platforms are private companies, the First Amendment doesn't apply to them, and I suppose neither should the American tradition of free-ranging, anything-goes political speech. Well, as mentioned previously, in 1946, the Supreme Court ruled on this issue in Marsh versus Alabama. This was a company town, and the streets were effectively owned by the company. And so Jehovah's Witnesses wanted to hand out their literature, and the company said no. And the Supreme Court said that there are limits to private property, that free speech was a positive good, regardless of whether it was being suppressed by government or by private enterprise. Frank continues, in the absence of such censorship, we are told the danger is stark. In a story about Steve Bannon's ongoing Trumpist podcast, for example, ProPublica informs us that, quote, extremism experts say the rhetoric still feeds into an alternative reality that breeds anger and cynicism, which may ultimately lead to violence, unquote. The bad violence, not like the good violence, like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. In liberal circles these days, there is a palpable horror of the uncurated world of thought spaces flourishing outside the consensus of unauthorized voices blabbing freely in some arena where there is no moderator to whom someone might be tuned in. The remedy for bad speech, we now believe, is not more speech, as per Justice Brandeis's famous formula, but an extremism expert shushing the world. What an enormous task that shushing will be. American political culture is and always has been a matter of myth and idealism and selective memory. Selling, not studying, is our peculiar national talent. Hollywood, not historians, is who writes our sacred national epics. Debunking was how the literary left used to respond to America's Niagara of nonsense. Criticism, analysis, mockery, and protest, these were our weapons. We were rational-minded skeptics, and we had a grand old time deflating creationists, faith healers, puffed-up militarists, and corporate liars of every deception. Censorship and blacklisting were, with important exceptions, the weapons of the puritanical right. Those were their means of lashing out against rap music or suggestive plays or left-wingers who were gainfully employed. What explains the clampdown media among liberals? The most obvious answer is because they need an excuse. Consider the history. The right has enjoyed tremendous success over the last few decades, and it is true that conservatives' capacity for hallucinatory, fake populist appeals has helped them to succeed. But that success has also happened because the Democrats, determined to make themselves the party of the affluent and the highly educated, have allowed the right to get away with it. There have been countless times over the years where Democrats might have reappraised this dumb strategy and changed course. But again and again, they chose not to, blaming their failure on everything but their glorious post-industrial vision. In 2016, for example, liberals chose to blame Russia for their loss rather than look in the mirror. On other occasions, they assured one another that they had no problems with white blue-collar workers until it became undeniable that they did, whereupon liberals chose to blame such people for rejecting them. And again, going back to James Burnham, he warned that the elites must allow entry, and the elites must be willing to modify policies which are, to their benefit, but not to the benefit of the masses. But Frank, who is on the left, has been admirable in pointing out that the Democrats are determined simply to acquire all the power and the money for themselves. And if the working class, particularly the white working class in America, complains, well, they should blame themselves for not having chosen better parents. The term woke capital, I'm not sure whether it was invented, but it was certainly popularized by a Twitter account at woke capital, which I highly commend to you. The host of it seems to think that he's going to be kicked off Twitter soon enough. So get it while you can. He retweeted a post from Grimy Timey. Globo Homo is interested in your pets. And apparently there is a whole panoply of pride. Yes, of pride accoutrements for your doggies. Yes, nothing new under the sun, first as farce, then as horror. And there is a picture from South Park of a dog with the caption, "Don't be gay, Spark." Oh, yes. Calling racism a public health threat, the head of the CDC plans to boost investments in communities of color that are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. This is Rachel Walensky, who, of course, was near weeping a couple of weeks ago, claiming that she was scared. Woke Capital comments, every dollar must be spent towards eradicating the scourge of racism. Yeah, if you just go to his site, you just see how pervasive this is. Oh, you used to think that business was, not interested in your political opinions? Big business is interested in everything you do, say, and think. Here's a particularly risible and frightening example. This is from the postmillennial.com. United Airlines joined other corporations in the U.S. government in making identity characteristics a qualifier for employment. On Tuesday, the company announced that our flight deck should reflect the diverse group of people on board our planes every day. That's why we plan for 50% of the 5,000 pilots we train in the next decade to be women or people of color, unquote. And they invited those who are women or specifically not white to apply to train for work with United Airlines. Well, a couple of things about that. First of all, I've flown United Airlines in the past. I'm never going to fly it again. for two reasons. One, I'm grossly offended by their pandering, their anti-white pandering, anti-white male pandering. And second, because I don't want to die in an airplane crash. I have read several stories recently that were quite disquieting. These stories suggested that when, let's say, BIPOC pilots were hired by American Airlines, they were effectively unfireable, leading to catastrophe or near catastrophe on several occasions. But back to the PM story. The link directs would-be pilots to a training program. The site states that United expects to hire more than 10,000 pilots over the next decade. 5,000 of those spots are dedicated to women and people of color by 2030. The recruitment video features the voices of two pilots, one male and one female. United says that partner organizations will help identify and recruit top talent. The financial barrier to entry for highly qualified and motivated candidates will be tackled through a partnership with, wait for it, J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the bastions of woke capital. OANN's Jack Posobiec said simply, disastrous, do not do this. What makes the United program different from other corporate diversity initiatives is that pilots are not in boardrooms, but flying planes with lots of people on them. It's the kind of job where a person should have skill and affinity, skin color, or the lived experience that comes with a racial or ethnic background has absolutely no bearing on how best to safely fly planes. Although I'm waiting to have it explained to me that gravity is a white supremacist concept. It's coming. According to Zippa, a careers website, the current demographic of pilots is over 86% male and over 88% white. And, well, that's just bad. It's bad. You know, there's no other way. It's racism. It doesn't matter if perhaps women don't want to be pilots in the way that men do, or that, I don't know, people of other races perhaps not drawn to it as much, but we all know that everyone is equally drawn to all possible professions, although we don't see very many women in the mines or in the oil fields, to give two examples. Hannah Blow from Breitbart, more on what I said earlier. The CDC deemed racism a serious public health threat. In an entry titled, Racism is a Serious Threat to the Public's Health, the agency asserts racism is intricately intertwined with public health matters. Quote, a growing body of research shows that centuries of racism in this country has had a profound and negative impact on communities of color. The impact at which communities of color? On Chinese people? On Korean people? On people from India? Has it? They seem to do very well in America, but never mind that. The impact is pervasive and deeply embedded in our society, affecting where one lives, learns, works, worships, and plays, and creating inequities in access to a range of social and economic benefits, such as housing, education, wealth, and employment. Well, strangely enough, in the United States, minorities get statutory benefits that white people do not get. White people are discriminated against officially in the United States, which is something which is never mentioned in this context for some reason. These conditions, often referred to as social determinants of health, are key drivers of health inequities within, not inequalities, mind you, but inequities within communities of color, placing those within these populations at greater risk for poor health outcomes. Well, there's some minorities in the United States which are definitely more at risk for COVID-19. And the primary reason for that is obesity. I'm waiting for the argument that systemic racism causes certain minorities in the United States to eat like pigs. Yeah. And of course, yes, racism has become, white supremacy has become a unified field theory. It's responsible for everything that happens on Earth. And apparently white people are the only people who have agency. No one else does. Yes, white people are witches. Witches. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Pelpicasso88. Ann Run. Let's see. Okay. Phoebe Waller-Bridge cast in new Indiana Jones movie, says Pelpicasso88. Now Indy can be lectured on his white privilege and misogyny. Hello to William Hicks and Cecil Henry, Hickman Warrior. Cecil Henry says, indeed, those who seek white genocide prefer mixing to displacement. Their object is not to substitute, their object is to destroy. Hickman Warrior says, woke capital is using the same tactics as the CCPs on the Uyghurs. MF Superstar says, bet kids today are surprised to find out Amazon is named after a river in South America. GC Style says, Amazon's operations remind me of Tennessee Ernie Ford's song, 16 Tons. Matthew Gubbins says, imagine being mad at China, LOL. MF Superstar says, Trump kind of ran on Thomas Frank playbook. Yes, he did. And of course, Frank is intelligent enough to understand this, unlike these people at The View and elsewhere, bleating about, oh, Trump is not family values. Oh, he's not a true conservative. No, he never ran as a conservative, and that's why he won. Hello to Max Vitriol. Federal reality star sounds like an unpublished Philip K. Dick story. I quite like that. That is a good. Hello to Professor Paul. Says, hi, make me an elite. I work for cheap. Hello to Steve. A pug wearing a rainbow sweater would be terrifying to behold. That fellow Aquino Cure, whose blog I mentioned a couple of days ago, has written about this extensively, that homosexual men much prefer dogs to cats. And I think one of the reasons for this is that they like to play dress up, and they like to play dress up with their dogs. And dogs will put up with this. Typically, if you try pulling a sweater, rainbow sweater or otherwise, or some such nonsense on a cat, you will get nasty scratches. Oh, what else do we have here? Harrison Ford will reprise his role, which is ridiculous, says Pelpicasso88. He'll be 80 the next year. Yeah, I'm trying to think of that Irish actor, not Gabriel Byrne, the one who became an action star in recent years. And one of his more recent movies, I Want My Daughter Back. You see him scaling a fence, okay? It was an 8-foot-high fence, something like that. And there are so many cuts in this scene. It is absolutely hilarious. You just wonder how many days it took to get him over that fence. Hickman Warrior says worst air safety records are from African Airlines and Cubana, the national airline of Cuba. Pelpicasso88 says KFC is an instrument of white supremacy. United has direct flights to Israel from U.S., I understand. Doubt the Israelis will not object. Jonathan Pohl says Soviets sent lots of Russian German women to work in the oil fields in October 1942 and many to coal mines in March 1943. Steve says BIPOC engineers just have a dialogue with metal fatigue when the wings start to fail. Metal fatigue. Liam Neeson. Yes, that's his name, Liam Neeson. Yes, he was in Excalibur. There were a lot of Kieran Hines. That was his first movie as well. And maybe another Irish actor who got his start on Excalibur. It was filmed in Ireland by John Boorman. And Nicole Williamson, he was aghast at all these Irish actors saying that he objected to their pronunciation of the English language. The character Igraine, he said, and he didn't seem to be joking, that they were pronouncing it not as Igraine, but as your granny. There are plenty of YT videos of cats being ridiculously dressed by ridiculous women, says Anne Run. I have no doubt of this, but as I say, these women got nasty scratches, on their arms and perhaps even on their faces, which you're not going to see in the videos. Cats do not like being buggered about. Even brushing them can be dangerous. My advice is to wear gloves, like snow gloves, if you're ever brushing a cat. Oh, yes. More on wokeness. Wokeness in gaming. This is from PCMag.com. Intel Bleep software filters out toxic slurs in voice chats as you game. The Bleep program will be available as a beta and uses the AI processing on Intel-powered PCs to remove abusive language. You can also calibrate what kind of toxic speech the program filters out. Oh, ableism and body shaming, aggression, alphabet people hate, and it goes on and on. Tired of online gamers shouting racist or sexist slurs as you play? Well, like you play like a girl? Is that going to be banned now? Intel is preparing to roll out a new program that can help users automatically filter out abusive language from their in-game voice chats. Yes, it starts out as helping, then it becomes mandatory. Wait for it. But there's problems with this, which have already been noticed. What was it? How long ago was this? Was this back in the 90s when a Washington city councilor got into an absolute hellstorm because during a council meeting, he used the word niggardly. Yeah, that was quite some time ago. This is from Game Rant. Japanese Apex Legends players are being unfairly banned over a common word. Apex Legends players using a certain word in Japanese are having their accounts banned from the game despite having no intention of offense. Oh dear. The problem at hand is that players are reporting being banned for using the word nigero in Japanese, despite its similar sound to a certain English racial slur, which cannot be mentioned under penalty of death. The word is completely unrelated. Nigero simply means to run in Japanese, which is certainly something that one might find themselves telling a teammate during the heat of battle. I've also heard that the Chinese for or bears a strong resemblance to this 6-letter word, which we must never utter upon pain of death. I spoke about this at the time, but I was reminded of it, and the time was 3 years ago. NASCAR driver Connor Daly lost a major sponsor of his race after his father, a retired Formula One driver, acknowledged using a racial slur in an interview in the early 80s. Yeah, how about that? The iniquity visited, upon the son. Yes. His father, Derek Daly, was fired as a long-term racing analyst for Wish TV after acknowledging that he used a racially derogatory phrase in the early 1980s, the Indianapolis Star reported. Daly told the Star he'd moved from Ireland at the time and never realized the expression was a racial slur. In a statement that he posted on Twitter on Friday, the day after he was fired, Derek Daly said, "I had no idea in this country that phrase had a horribly different meaning and connotation as it was commonplace in Ireland." So, yeah, Derek Daly, who I've interviewed several times, found him to be a delightful fellow. So he gets fired for admitting that he'd said something in the early 1980s, and almost 4 decades later, his son loses his ride because of something his father had said almost 4 decades ago. Again, the most powerful word ever, the modern tetragrammaton. Here's a piece in American Mind by Peachy Keenan, How to Woke proof your kids. It begins, you must reach wokeness herd immunity. Woo, digging a 300 square foot bunker suitable for young children is hard work. My back isn't what it used to be. So far, we're down 50 feet down in the backyard and are about to pour 10-inch thick Wi-Fi proof concrete walls. The kids will have goldfish, coloring books, a Kindle that contains all of Western classical literature, Play-Doh, and a hose for drinking water. They'll be lowered into the hole when they turn 6, and we'll let them climb out when they turn 18. We plan to tell any nosy neighbors that we sent the kids away to a new progressive anti-racism academy. Cruel, you say? Not if you're trying to insulate your precious children from all the all-powerful wokeness algorithm. In fact, it's the only way to be sure. Will I miss them? Sure, but I'm comforted knowing that they'll be among the few who survived the radioactive woke-lear fallout released this year. Oh, you don't want to chain your kids up in the basement, seal all the doors, rather not ship them to an ice floe off Greenland or a yurt in outer Mongolia? Then, friends, you are going to need to become a master of anti-wokeness, of which no one is pumping the brakes at all. It's only going faster, and you're going to have to leap off the train. Prevent wokeness from colonizing their developing brains. Effective models for wokeness herd immunity already exist. Look at the Amish, the Hasidic Jews, the Mormons. Insular, self-sufficient communities with strong codes of behavior tend to better prepare children to resist the YouTube, TikTok, Instagram algorithms and public education. You know Warren Jeff's 11-year-old wives aren't watching Lil Nas X give Old Scratch a reach around or doing book reports on white fragility. Look, Peachy Keenan writes, I'm not advocating for a pure Benedict option, let alone the Jeff's option. After all, most of us have to conduct our lives on the wide open American cultural wasteland out of stark economic necessity. None of us are perfectly protected from the spreading, suppurating ooze of wokeness. I have not yet smashed our Spectrum router with a sledgehammer, so even though I enjoy access to a moderately insular Catholic community, my 5-year-old knows how to twerk. If yours does too, know that you are not alone. There is, alas, no pure escape from wokeness. Like whiteness, systemic racism, and mythical COVID variants, wokeness is in the very air we breathe. There is no way out until someone detonates a couple of EMPs or the aliens finally show themselves. As with any virus, you can inoculate your children against the worst ravages of our modern plague. I'm therefore calling for a relentless propaganda and proselytizing campaign aimed at children. You can do this with your kids at home, in the car, or at home, not in public. If you were caught saying such things out loud, well, I hope you have the number of a bail bondsman memorized. 1, speak truth to gender and never shut up. I spent years pointing out decrepit junkies by the freeway on-ramp to my kids as a real-life anti-drug lesson. See that sunburned hobo covered in open sores, son? When he was a teenager, he smoked pot once, and now look at him. When it comes to gender, beware. Lack of confidence and moral uncertainty and otherwise normal, educated parents have given the pronoun people an easy port of entry into your child's hungry cortex, and they are rushing into the breach. Despite what the clowns running this circus want you to think, it actually is possible to be 100% certain which gender your baby will identify with, as long as you commit as a parent to stopping entry of brain worms. First, you must shun gender neutrality. Dress your girls like ladies and your boys like off-duty firemen. If your little boy requests to wear a dress to school, tell him firmly that boys do not wear dresses, only girls do, and you refuse to allow him to entertain fantasy notions. If boys are allowed to wear dresses at your school, find a new school. If your children insist there are more than 2 genders, spend some time at the zoo and challenge them to identify these elusive other genders. 2, teach abortion as a horror movie. Abortion is a gateway drug for the left, the best one they ever devised. Luckily for us, it works both ways. Once a child decides that abortion is freedom or healthcare or justice, it's easy to get them to sign in to the rest of the woke agenda. But once they understand what abortion entails on the procedure table and what aborted remains are, they can almost never be turned to the dark side. Remind your kids that unborn children are alive and are humans just like they were when they are in the womb. You can say, imagine if I had aborted your youngest sibling. Lots of women do that, you know. They just don't want another baby. 3, channel your inner patriotic boomer. America 2021 is a weak nation being run into the ground by blinkered nincompoops and evil nihilists, but it was not always so. Despite my current status as a cynical dissident in my own land, I have no choice but to double down on patriotic propaganda for the prepubescent set. 4, radically rehab your entertainment diet. Ban new books, encourage the classics. Harry Potter was written by a TERF, so it survives my ruthless modern book purge. Avoid new music, especially since stars popular with children are prone to making porn, you know, for kids, of themselves giving Beelzebub a rub and tug. We're listening to the wet-ass poppin' soundtrack tonight, biatch. Put a spoonful of sugar on that. New movies are all terrible, but who cares? Just stick to the 80s classics where men are men and women are Kathleen Turner. 5, make wokeness cringe. Our friends over at the Pop Culture Factory are doing most of the heavy lifting with this one. Everything wokeness turns to cringe in the end. Even America's favorite celebrities get debased lower and lower until they become unpaid propaganda ministers for the regime. Help them along by consistently helping your kids see that these influencers are losers, soy boys, and psychotics, and you should always do the opposite of what they tell you to do. Do not buy their sneakers or their beauty products. Mock LeBron James and Miley Cyrus and Joe Biden and Meghan Markle and the woke agenda mercilessly. It's incalculably lame. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake, and boy, are they. And finally, from Peachy Keenan, good luck, you're going to need it. What are you supposed to do when the emperor has no clothes and neither do any of the townspeople? Maybe just giving your children permission to see things clearly is enough of a gift and an immunity superpower. Let's hope. And again, this is an essay from the American Mind, How to Woke-Proof Your Kids. Perhaps wishful thinking. This is from the Wentworth Report. The Coming Coalition of the Unwoke by Josh Hammer. Liberalism, real actual Enlightenment liberalism, is increasingly on the defensive in America. Well, as you know, it's my view that it's finished, done. Just as liberalism became deformed and then became extinct, conservatism has become deformed and, well, is practically extinct, but should be formally extinct. The age of reason is over. That's my opinion, not Josh Hammer's. Though there remain many right-leaning classical liberals, those who tend to prioritize the free market and individual liberty, the locus of the intellectual energy on the grassroots American right now comes from those who question whether our modern societal commitment to values-neutral liberalism has actually succeeded in conserving much of anything. On the left, the traditional live and let live liberalism of John Stuart Mill has been far too reluctant to push back in earnest against the woke ideology. John Stuart Mill was a much nastier and more dangerous person than that. John Stuart Mill argued that societal constraints were even worse than formal legal constraints. Hammer says that a new kind of tactical strategic alliance is needed. The solution is for a political coalition of the unwoke. Admittedly, this coalition will be somewhat crass and for many uncomfortable, but much like the conservative fusionism that ascended to the status of the mainstream Republican Party platform during the era when the right's disparate factions all had their various reasons to oppose Soviet communism, so too can a coalition of the unwoke be based around a commonality of interests arrayed against a mutually shared authoritarian foe. As critical race theory pervades national K-12 education and the anti-racism of race-hustling charlatans like Ibram X. Kendi solidifies its beachhead, the idea for such a coalition is rapidly gaining steam. In an Epoch Times essay earlier this week, educator William Brooks argued in a remarkably forthright fashion that, quote, liberals have only two options to choose from. Either they will dance to the tune of the Marxists and help bring Western democracy to an end, or they will seek to develop a pro-liberty alliance with conservatives, unquote. That choice is just as stark as it is valid. Those of us on the traditionalist right must do all we can in our own unique capacity to accelerate this trend and welcome left liberals in with open arms and a warm embrace. The imperative of the moment demands that left liberals join us in an alliance against the neo-Marxism of wokeness, cancel culture, and anti-racism. The survival of Western civilization quite literally depends on it. Could be wishful thinking, perhaps, but I know that there are people on the left who are fed up with identity politics, especially if they're white, because they know that for all their allyship, the revolutionaries will be coming for them soon enough. This is from Gabrielle Fonrouge in the New York Post. A former University of Virginia medical student can proceed with a lawsuit against the school over his expulsion, which stemmed from questions he asked about the nuance of microaggressions during a panel discussion that led to him being branded a threat, a federal judge has ruled. Kiran Bhattacharya, that is quite the name, Kiran Bhattacharya, sued the prestigious state university for violating his First Amendment rights, and a judge denied the school's attempt to have it tossed last week. The trouble for Bhattacharya began in October 2018 when the then second-year medical student attended a panel discussion on the subject of microaggressions. The term is defined by Merriam-Webster as a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. During a Q&A portion of the panel, Bhattacharya sought clarification on the definition of microaggression, asking the presenter, Assistant Dean Beverly Cowell Adams, if only marginalized groups were impacted by it. Adams said it was a very good question, and the answer is no. And then Bhattacharya cut in and said her slides indicated victims of microaggressions must be members of marginalized groups, so that's contradictory, he said. What I had there is kind of the generalized definition. In fact, I extended beyond that. As you see, I extended to any marginalized group, Adams replied. Follow-up question, Bhattacharya said. Exactly how do you define marginalized, and who is a marginalized group? Where does that go? I mean, it seems extremely non-specific. Adams replied, that's intention, and it's intention to make it more non-specific. Well, Bhattacharya continued to challenge her, essentially arguing that the definition and logic behind microaggressions were anecdotal and not backed up with hard scientific data. Another dean stepped in and told a story about how former peers and colleagues subjected her to harmless jokes and microaggressions related to stereotypes about people who come from rural states, like she did. The next day, assistant urology professor Nora Kern, who helped organize the panel and was in attendance, filed a professionalism concern card against Bhattacharya, saying he asked a series of questions that were quite antagonistic. In other words, questioning the ideology of microaggressions is itself a microaggression, but I don't know, perhaps a macroaggression. According to Kern, he pressed on and stated one faculty member was being contradictory. His level of frustration and anger seemed to escalate until another faculty member diffused the situation by calling on another student for questions. I am shocked that a med student would show so little respect toward faculty members. It worries me how he will do on wards, Kern wrote. That speech, that sounds actionable to me. What did this fellow from India with the bug Irish first name, that he's going to go around on the ward harming people, killing people, perhaps, because he's upset about microaggressions and how this concept is totally bogus. Doing well by doing good, they call it. This is from dirt.com. Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrice Khan-Cullors lands Topanga Canyon compound. It doesn't look like much. I have some idea of how insanely expensive property is up there in the hills. Let's see, 1.4 million. Okay, well, 2,400 square feet. It was built in 2003, was it? 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, plus 1 bed, 1 bath guest house. A quarter of an acre. A secluded mini compound tucked into LA's rustic and semi-remote Topanga Canyon was recently sold for a tad more than $1.4 million to a corporate entity that public records show is controlled by Patrice Kahn-Colors, 37-year-old social justice visionary and co-founder of the galvanizing and for some controversial Black Lives Matter movement. Kahn-Colors, a UCLA and USC graduate, married about 5 years ago to social activist and amateur boxer Janaya Khan, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto. Black Lives Matter Toronto actually holds the view that, yes, Janaya Khan is, black, queer, and gender non-conforming. Okay. Well, misery loves company, as they say. Black Lives Matter Toronto actually holds, in all seriousness, that it was black people that built Toronto, even though there were, like 17 of them at the time when Toronto was built. The BLM activists think that Canada is essentially the United States. They don't see any difference between the two. If you wanted to point out to them that organized slavery, certainly as it exists in the United States, never existed in Canada, they would call you a liar because everyone knows that, I don't know, 25% of people in Canada were always black and they were enslaved until Abraham Lincoln freed them in 1865. In more real estate news, this is from Mary Jacob and Elizabeth Rossner at the New York Post. After years of not being able to find a buyer for her Saddle River mansion, Rosie O'Donnell finally caved and sold her home at a loss. But the home's next residents are already causing a stir in the Tony neighborhood, home to the rich and famous, from rapper Ja Rule to singer Mary J. Blige. The 6-bedroom, 9-bathroom abode is expected to be demolished and turned into a series of affordable housing units per a landmark public court settlement with Fair Share Housing Center. I don't understand why Rosie O'Donnell would get rid of this place. Does she need the cash? Very handsome. The agreement has left its upscale residents outraged. According to an unnamed source who lives in the area and was familiar with the proceedings, the borough had plans to comply with the affordable housing requirements in Saddle River. The requirements usually include sites that are 100% affordable. Ho, ho, ho. Property values are going to take a nosedive, and it couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. You see, it's not all depressing on the KMG show. Not at all. Not at all. Jim Kunstler asked today, will America survive Joe Biden? And he has some things to say about his son, Hunter Biden. If you want to understand the complete failure of moral authority in America, seek no further than the Gothic doings of the Biden family, especially now that the president's degenerate son, Hunter, has been rewarded with a $2 million advance against royalties, i.e. money up front, from Simon & Schuster and a gala publicity tour of the national news media designed to conceal his criminal culpability and evidence contained on the laptop from hell that he stupidly abandoned in a Delaware repair shop while lurching through his daily doings on one of countless drug jags he's enjoyed between rehabs since his dad stepped back into national politics. The failure is shared by a national news media that refuses to scrutinize the obvious financial crimes documented on the laptop. The FBI, which sat on the laptop through the months of Trump impeachment number 1, while the computer contained evidence of Hunter's grifting and money laundering directly benefiting the big guy, aka Joe Biden, at issue in the impeachment, and the Department of Justice, which has been sitting on its hands pretending to conduct an investigation into all this. The moral darkness of the family is beyond Shakespearean. It ranges from fantastically sordid personal indecencies, like Hunter posting drug-fueled selfie sex videos with whores on the Pornhub website, to intimations of lewd consort with his teenage niece, to the admitted fact of him bird-dogging his dead brother's wife, Haley, and into financial misdeeds that suggest Hunter sold out his country by peddling Joe Biden's favor to agents of the Chinese Communist Party and other foreign nationals. This body of unresolved allegations haunts the House of Biden like some stinking dead animal decaying under the Oval Office floorboards that everyone pretends not to notice. Most recently, in a striking instance of in-your-face duplicity, Joe Biden announced his new crusade against gun ownership the same week that credible evidence surfaced that Hunter had obtained a .38 caliber handgun by lying on the application about his drug use, well documented in his discharge record from the Navy Reserve for failing a cocaine blood test, as well as his repeat visits to drug rehab clinics. In 2018, it happened that his then paramour, Halle Baden, fearing for his behavior, took the gun from Hunter's car and tossed it in a dumpster outside a Wilmington food market. Directly afterward, the Secret Service office in Wilmington went to the gun shop, StarQuest Shooters and Survival Supply, to ask for the forms Hunter had filed out and signed to buy the gun, which itself was never recovered. Incidentally, the Secret Service had no security detail assigned to Joe Biden or his family at the time. Joe was out of office and not yet a candidate for president. Plus, the Secret Service has no authority to investigate gun records, a duty of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. What was going on with all that? Do you think AG Merrick Garland might be asking around the DOJ building? The gross failure of federal authority and abuse of authority in this land is an ongoing process. You can date it back to whenever you like, say to all the confusion and deception around the JFK assassination, or even further. But it has never been so broad, so deep, and so blatant as when Donald Trump became a candidate and all the resources of the CIA, DOJ, and the FBI were marshaled against him in the phony operations that became Russiagate. Now, under Joe Biden, the system is entirely poisoned and corrupt. Hunter is supposedly under investigation by the DOJ for tax fraud. Is that all? Are they not curious at all about the imputation of Chinese influence over decision-making in Joe Biden's White House? Apparently, China paid for the influence it now enjoys. Millions of ordinary American citizens have seen the actual record, screen captured from Hunter's laptop, of email correspondence that details the many deals and payments made by Chinese companies run by the CCP to Hunter's various shell corporations, as well as the memos between Hunter and his partners breaking down the payment schedule among Biden family members, including the big guy. Is there not some larger, very large question as to how this Manchurian candidate with failing mental capacities, seemingly run by other figures in the shadows, came to be installed at the head of our government? The USA will not survive as a nation unless we seek to find out, Jim Kunstler concludes. And let's bring this up here. Oh, yeah. Someone called Nikki McCann Ramirez, Nikki, Nikki, how long has it been that people who believe themselves to be respectable, like Christie with an I, the governor of South Dakota, have styled themselves with porn star or stripper names? Anyway, Nikki McCann Ramirez says Tucker Carlson gives a passionate defense of white replacement theory on his show. Zach Beauchamp, senior correspondent for Vox, comments, the clip is, if anything, worse than it sounds. This isn't watered down white nationalism. It's the undiluted, 100 proof, genuine article. You dumbass, 100 proof means 50% alcohol. It is diluted. This is why people shouldn't use metaphors. Yeah. Now, Tucker Carlson couched this in civic nationalist terms, using an argument similar to the libertarian argument against mass immigration, that Americans have this country and these people are brought in and diluting what we have. We didn't ask for them to be brought in. But no, my response is somewhat starker. Shh, they're not supposed to notice. Repeat after me. Diversity is our highest good, until they're a minority, and then look out. Come on, we're back to Schrodinger's cat again. How many years ago was it that President Bill Clinton was crowing that come, I don't know, what, 2040, something like that, where whites were going to be a minority in the United States. And here's why that's a good thing. More recently, we had this fellow that I've talked about on this show, this professor at the University of Ottawa, Amir Attarall, an Iranian from Los Angeles, who was pretty much telling the Quebecois that they had better start groveling to minorities in the province of Quebec right now, because they were going to be a minority. Yeah, and consider that. This is a threat. It's a threat of violence. That's all it is. And apparently, yeah, sure, let's threaten violence against white people, because we're going to be in charge soon. We're going to have the whip hand, and then they'll be begging. They'll be begging for anything from us. This is from the Daily Star in London. Russia-Ukraine days from war as Vladimir Putin puts 100,000 troops on border. The Russia-Ukraine crisis could be days from exploding into war, with a source saying UK commanders are on high alert and monitoring the situation with growing concern. Yeah, I wonder why Moscow has amassed close to 100,000 troops at the Flashpoint border. Could it be because the government of the United States has made it quite clear that the Crimea actually belongs to the Ukraine, and they intend for it to be returned to the Ukraine? I actually don't think that the British military is going to have much to do with this war if it breaks out. But, you know, that's why Americans voted in record numbers for Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., because under Donald Trump, America was not being involved in enough wars, you know, especially a war with Russia, which is a nuclear power. Yeah, it's just, you know, America was just getting too sissified under Trump. You know, if you're not threatening World War III, you should just hang your head in shame. Come on. We all know that. Let's take a look at the chat. Lakoza Biden, says Bob Paxson. Okay, Hauper says, using metaphors is like juggling pit vipers with greased hands while riding a unicycle. I don't know. Zach Beauchamp, I don't think that he's a hard liquor man. Come on. You use the proof metaphor and you don't know what proof means? Shameful. Just, R.I.P. DMX. I see that Jamel Bowie was, according to his Twitter feed, quite broken up about the death of DMX. Was he a well-known humanitarian? I can't say, you know, I knew that he was famous and had 5 number ones or whatever, but I can't say that I know very much about him. Oh, apparently he had a feud with Ja Rule, who for some reason was mentioned earlier in this broadcast. Oh, I like this. The Wikipedia entry. Legal issues. 1, 1998 to 1999. 2, 2000 to 2005. 3, 2008 to 2011. 4, 2013. 5, 2015. 6, 2017 to 2019 tax fraud conviction. Apparently he had so many legal issues that this had to be broken up into 6 sections. Did he have 15 children or something like that? Yeah, I read something like 13 or 15 children, something like that. But I get that that's not uncommon amongst the rappers. But he's in rap heaven now. Rest in power, DMX. Josh Randall Disavows says I should play the YT video entitled DMX Freestyle. Okay. Oh, he was a scientist, says Laponius Maximus Meridius. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Hikma Warrior says when blacks took over Haiti, they massacred every white person they got a hold of in gruesome African ways. Then they massacred all the mulattoes after that. Fun fact, Haiti, the country, was formally consecrated to the devil, which might have something to do with how miserable the place has been for more than 200 years. I remember reading about Francois Duvalier, that his secret police, or the muscle of his regime, was called la Tonton Macoute. And then I thought, well, what does that mean? It literally means boogeyman. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and the United States has been involved in Haiti again and again and again. Oh, we're throwing the bad people out and we're putting the good people in. What was it back in the 80s or 90s? The good guy was some deranged Catholic priest or some deranged ex-Catholic priest. It just never gets any better in Haiti. Pal Picasso 88 says maybe they've been watching Murdoch Mysteries 1905 Toronto and it's 1/3 black. Again, I will mention that in 1971, in the whole country of Canada, which had 21 million people at the time, there were 34,400 blacks in the entirety of Canada. Halper says Neil Young has lived in Topanga Canyon since forever. British American says, I would bet that Asian guy that got wailed on in the New York City subway was a Korean who said "I" or "as for me" on his phone in earshot of that black yahoo. Intersectionality is the war of all against all. Anron says that Kathleen Turner was very good in Body Heat, but I never thought much of her looks. Well, she did get like really fat, but she has one of the great voices. One of the great voices. Let's talk about my own benighted country, Canada. And I found a picture which sums up this country, just like no other picture that I've ever seen. This is from a story by Tyler Dawson in the National Post. Kenny's divided house, COVID pandemic widens urban-rural rift within Alberta government. It's up to 17 MLAs in Alberta who have publicly called out Premier Kenny for yet another lockdown. So here's a picture, and it's captioned, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney leaves the Alberta Legislature on April the 8th, 2021. So Kenny is wearing a sports jacket, a pair of slacks. He's wearing a shirt and a club tie. And it seems to be quite windy there in the legislature because the tie has been blown off like this. He is outdoors and he is alone. He's going down a staircase. He is wearing not one, but 2 masks. Repeat. Here we have a man outdoors, alone, on quite a windy day, and he's wearing not one, but 2 masks. You know that Canadians, until fairly recently, were not considered to be sissies. Quite the opposite, actually. Kenny is threatening his MLAs, saying that, you better not counsel stuff that Dr. Dina says we can't do or I'll kick you out of the caucus. This is from Global News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is issuing a warning to young people as new COVID-19 variants continue to blanket the country, spreading quickly and sending younger Canadians into ICUs. How many? How many? How many? I'm just going to scroll down the story here. Yeah, okay. Any numbers with regard to how many young Canadians are in ICUs? Oh, one patient was in his early 30s. Okay, there's one. There's one. No, of course, we're not going to get any numbers about this. Just talk about sinister variants, which are going to bring about a biological Fukushima. Got to keep the panic porn going. Oh, yes. The Quebecers, the Quebecois, until fairly recently, were not known as sissies either. This is from Post-Millennial. Breaking, Quebec Premier François Legault enforces 8 p.m. pandemic curfew for Montreal. The mask mandate announced by health authorities this morning isn't the only new change coming for Quebecers. Quebec's mask mandate now extends to outdoor activities. Too funny. Too funny. Oh, here's a rising latrine walla in Canada. His name is Dr. Lawrence Lowe, and he is not an old stock Canadian. And as I've mentioned previously, so many of these public health officers are not old stock Canadians. They come from places with no tradition of liberty whatsoever. They come from places where might is right. Macht ist recht. Peel, that is outside Toronto, Public Health, turned down an offer at least 5,000 COVID-19 vaccine doses to inoculate essential industrial workers in mid-March. The offer from the province to Peel's medical officer came after Dr. Lawrence Lowe ordered the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Brampton closed due to an outbreak involving hundreds of workers. You see, Dr. Lowe believes he has his own schedule, so 5,000 people could have been vaccinated, and he said no because it offended him. And Brian Lilly at the Toronto Sun says Canada is supposed to be a democracy, not a dictatorship. Well, where have you been, Brian Lilly? Come on, get with the program. A piece from Conservative Woman Co. UK, an excellent site, a very convenient pandemic. This is by Daniel Miller. In the early stages of the ongoing war on terror, which started 20 years ago, a nebulous conception of the enemy, non-existent victory conditions, and the consistent dishonesty of warmongering politicians, such as Tony Blair, led some to wonder if the threat of the global axis of evil had been exaggerated to achieve some other set of goals. Today, in similar circumstances of unanswered questions and ambiguous realities underpinned by systematic deception, reinforced by Boris Johnson on Monday as he launched the new phase of the psychological and economic war he is waging on the British people, vaccine passports, and after that, this question is being asked, is there a pandemic? Was there ever a pandemic? Perhaps the most important point to grasp is that a pandemic is a construct, not an object. There is nothing you can point to at which is the pandemic, only various data points indicating that one exists. The World Health Organization changed its definition in 2008 to exclude the criterion of enormous numbers of deaths and illness. In other words, the definition of a pandemic is ultimately a matter of interpretation. There is no data that currently supports the claim that there is a pandemic in Britain at this moment, and whether any data ever did is doubtful. The scientific process has happened in reverse. Starting in January last year, the existence of a deadly new pandemic, unlike anything previously confronted, was conjectured on the basis of terrifying rumors and unreliable reports from China, not scientifically established facts. Once the existence of an extraordinary pandemic was assumed, extraordinary measures were justified to fight it, including the rapid deployment of highly unreliable PCR protocols developed by the Gates Foundation-funded Christian Drosten, shock propaganda messaging, a massive and drastic reduction in healthcare provision, which has functionally destroyed the NHS in order to protect it, and de facto euthanasia policies in care homes based on Neil Ferguson's Gates Foundation-funded models. Compromised administrative procedures recorded deaths as lives lost to the pandemic, providing further evidence for its existence. As is now well known, an overwhelming majority of pandemic casualties also suffered from other conditions, and the average age of victims tracks life expectancy in every country. If the pandemic had not been assumed to exist and the reckless and cynical interventions against it had not taken place, how would anyone know there was one? Data clearly demonstrates that lockdowns and related policies were never necessary or effective. Experimental therapies have been deployed, which are unreliable and potentially dangerous. Vaccination may or may not prevent contagion or transmission. The fact that governments and their paid experts are unable or unwilling to incorporate these matters into their thinking testifies either to their sinister intentions or the extent to which their mental processes have been corrupted. Yes, you don't need to, to quote David Mamet, you don't need to prove the evidence. You just issue a press release. I came across this by accident this morning. I found myself at the website of a man called Chris Spedding, who is a guitarist who has been active, since the late 60s. He's played with, well, not everybody, but lots of people that you've heard of, including Brian Ferry and Brian Eno and Elton John and Harry Nilsson and Joan Armour Plating, whatever her name is. Many, 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 many famous people. Robert Gordon, he had a partnership with him with many years. And announcing a new record, Brian Ferry, live at the Royal Albert Hall 2020. And the website comments, Brian Ferry has announced that all of the proceeds of this album will go to the band and crew. We are very touched and grateful for this kind, generous gesture from Brian. It is to compensate his band and crew for losing the touring work in the summer due to COVID. Thank you, Brian. Yes, I suppose if you're a musician and you've written lots of hit songs, you can live off your royalties. If you're a gigging musician, like a Chris Spedding, or a symphony orchestra musician, or various other types of musicians, you're SOL. And because we don't need live music anymore. Live music is dangerous because it's people being exposed to other people. But yes, well done, Brian Ferry. I saw Chris Spedding play once with Brian Ferry in Seattle in 1977. Brian Ferry was touring to support his solo album, In Your Mind, and he had just an absolutely tremendous band with both Chris Spedding and Phil Manzanera on guitars, the great John Wetton on bass, the great Paul Thompson on drums, Ann O'Dell on keyboards, and he had Martin Drover on trumpet, and Chris Mercer on sax, and Mel Collins on sax as well. Probably the best band that I have ever seen. As was at Paramount Theater in Seattle, and it only cost $1 because Atlantic Records was, I guess, paying for the tour, and they wanted to have bums in the seats. Let's go to the chat. Joan Armour Trading, yes. Harry Nilsson could sing his ass off, yes. Chris Spedding plays on the Nilsson Schmilsson album, including Jump Into the Fire, which you may remember from Goodfellas, which has a tremendous drum duet from Jim Gordon and Roger Pope, and has Herbie Flowers, who has worked with Chris Spedding many times and with many other famous people, famously detuning his bass. Chris Spedding was absolutely furious. He said, we had a good take, and here's Herbie Flowers messing around, and he ruined the take. And afterwards, everyone realized that it worked. He said he picked his spot. I suppose people would remember Herbie Flowers best for the bass line on Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. Asparagus is my favorite vegetable after Joe Biden, says Paul Casso 88. Let's see. The regional doctors heard Ford's initiatives, but their egos exceeded instruction from a print supply tycoon, says Geez, he's tall. Well, if we're all agreed that vaccines are a good thing, well, okay, so let's vaccinate these people. That should be a good thing. right? I don't know. I suppose it depends on how many, BIPOCs were working for the Amazon plant in Brampton. Tricky Who says, I'll wear a mask. What, welding? Sanding? But that's it. Everyone who's worn their stupid mask will always have to wear it on my land. Vaccinated, not welcome. Okay. Hello to Bob Paxson. And what are we going to talk about next? Oh, yes. YouTube has purged a video from the governor of Florida because he said that children don't have to wear masks. In New Hampshire, a high school coach has been fired. Track and field coach Bradley Keyes told reporters in New Hampshire that he has been fired after he refused to force students to wear masks outside while they were engaged in sporting activities. Wither, New Hampshire. Live free or die. Is that not their motto? The National Park Service has said there will be no Independence Parade on the National Mall in 2021 because there's just not enough time. Oh, let's see. April 9th, July 4th. Let's see. May, June, July. That's almost 3 months. They have 3 months to put something together, and they can't do it. It suggests to me that they don't want to do it. That would be my guess. From Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. CDC raises eyebrows for using character image almost identical to NPC meme. The 2018 Wojak meme meant to portray unthinking drone. The CDC raised eyebrows when it tweeted, getting a COVID-19 vaccine is an important tool to help stop the pandemic. And there is the Wojak. There's a Wojak meme. You may have some side effects, which are normal signs your body is building protection. There's the Wojak meme again. Watson comments the female character has exactly the same eyes and nose as the NPC Wojak. That means the short for non-player character. A meme that first came to prominence in 2018. According to Know Your Meme, the character is meant to represent people who do not think for themselves or are incapable of having an internal monologue, bearing many similarities to the terms basic and normie, according to the website. And many people picked up on this, as I did immediately after it appeared. Yes, life imitating art, which is always good to see, wouldn't you say? His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has died 2 months short of his 100th birthday. Again, according to Paul Joseph Watson, a pair of leftists were caught on camera outside Buckingham Palace carrying champagne bottles. Well, it was Prosecco, in an apparent effort to celebrate the death of Prince Philip before hastily retreating when they realized they were being filmed. And, okay, one of these women, she has an Irish name, Roisin. I'm probably not pronouncing it. She's a good-looking woman, but she does have a ring through her nose, which is all you need to know about her. She had tweeted, Thatcher's anniversary yesterday and Prince Philip dying today. The universe really is spoiling us. The family reunion in hell is happening as we speak. Up the Republic. I went to her Twitter feed and she has closed it down. What a shame. I would have thought that she would have appreciated some spirited conversation on Prince Philip's legacy. CNN is not happy with the late Prince Philip. From Rob Pichetta, laughed off for years as gaffes. Prince Philip's outbursts complicate his legacy? For many Britons, the defining characteristic of Prince Philip was not his public service or his royal standing, but his propensity to make unscripted, off-the-cuff, and sometimes wildly appropriate comments. The longest-serving consort in the history of the British monarchy died aged 99 on Friday, leaving behind a lengthy catalogue of provocative remarks that cemented his reputation as an outspoken royal, untamed by the family's carefully rehearsed public image. Yes. viewed charitably, those entrances could be seen as examples of a mischievous British sense of humor. Yeah, but it's worse than that. No. Humor is not good. According to Kehinde Andrews, professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University, said he was a throwback to old school racism. Painting him as a benign, cuddly uncle of the nation is simply untrue. What he says is very ugly and would not be tolerated anywhere else, nor from anyone else. Let's see what I think some other expert was brought in here. Oh, Frederick Joseph, an American writer whose book on his experiences with racism, a book about his experiences with racism. So we're going to have like 50 million of these books. Many of the same people who are having conversations about Prince Philip's history of racism and colonialism are now saying we should also mourn him. Egyptian-American commentator Mona El-Tahawi called the blanket news coverage of Philip's death ridiculous, saying he belonged to an institution which colonized and pillaged so extensively. Yeah. Other online users, meanwhile, resurfaced a 2017 Al Jazeera opinion piece by Hamid Dabashi, professor of Iranian studies and comparative literature at Columbia University, which concluded there is a beautiful barbarity of truth to Prince Philip's racism, exposing the ugly hypocrisy at the very foundation of Western civilization. Yeah, no racism amongst the Arabs. Do you know what the word for black is in Arabic? It means slave. Yeah. But let's examine the wit and wisdom of the late Prince Philip. He was a funny man. According to Carla Adam at the Washington Post, Prince Philip was known for quips. It's hard to think of a group of people he did not offend. Okay, here we go. Yes, there's a book, even, The Wicked Wit of Prince Philip. During a 1986 visit to China, he told a British student, if you stay here much longer, you will go home with slitty eyes. To a driving instructor in Scotland in 1995, he said, how do you keep the natives off the booze long enough to get them through the test? He once asked President Barack Obama, who was talking about world leaders, can you tell the difference between them? When he shook hands with Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who campaigns for education rights, he could be saying, there's one thing about children going to school. They go to school because their parents don't want them in the house. During a trip to Canada in 1976, he said, we don't come here for our health. We can think of other ways of enjoying ourselves. To a group of female Labour Party lawmakers during a reception at Buckingham Palace, so this is the feminist corner then. To singer Tom Jones, who of course is Welsh, what do you gargle with? Pebbles? To residents of the Cayman Islands, he said, aren't most of you descended from pirates? During a trip to a Bangladeshi youth club in central London in 2002, and see, when you join the royal family, that's the kind of ace gig you get, going to Bangladeshi youth clubs in central London. He said, so who's on drugs here? He looks as if he's on drugs. During a 2002 visit to Australia, he asked a group of Indigenous Australians, do you still throw spears at each other? Visiting Paraguay in 1963, he told the dictator, General Alfredo Stroessner, it's a pleasure to be in a country that isn't ruled by its people. When he met Nigeria's president, who was wearing traditional robes, he declared, you look like you are ready for bed. He asked the actor Simon Pegg, when did you first realize you had the voice of a mouse? During a 2010 visit to the United Arab Emirates, the Duke asked a group of expatriates, are you running away from something? After looking at businessman Atul Patel's name badge at a reception at the palace for British Indians, the Duke said, there's a lot of your family in tonight. On a visit to North London, he asked a disabled man on a mobility scooter, how many people have you knocked over this morning on that thing? My thoughts exactly. At a reception at Buckingham Palace, he asked Stoke-on-Trent lawmaker Joan Whalley what area she represented. When she said Stoke, the Duke replied, "Ghastly place, isn't it?" On his daughter, Princess Anne, "If it doesn't fart or eat hay, she isn't interested." And I think I've left out the best one, which appears in a piece in the London's Daily Express. Oh, well, here's some more. While watching Elton John at a 2001 Royal Variety performance, he muttered, "I wish he'd turned the microphone off." After 24-year-old Barnstaple Sea Cadet Elizabeth Rendell told the Duke she also worked in a nightclub in 2010, he asked, "Do you work at a strip club?" In 1967, he was asked whether he would ever visit the Soviet Union. He said, "I would like to go to Russia very much, although the bastards murdered half my family." Talking about unemployment at the beginning of the 80s, he said, "Everybody was saying we must have more leisure. Now they are complaining they are unemployed." Oh, and this is my absolute favorite. He told this to a World Wildlife Fund meeting in 1986, and he was a mainstay of the WWF for decades. He said, "If it has got 4 legs and it is not a chair, if it has got 2 wings and flies, but it is not an aeroplane, and if it swims and it is not a submarine, the Cantonese will eat it." Yes. As I say, a funny man. I'm going to go to the book club, but first I'm going to go to the chat. I didn't get around to today, but I'm going to, on Monday, I'm going to start examining a book at length, a little bit each day. And the book is from 1912, and it's by Hilaire Belloc, and it's called The Servile State, which is a remarkably prescient book with all this talk of universal basic income. D.B. Cooper says half of Prince Philip's family in the Greek Civil War, or is he related to the Romanovs? He's related to, well, the Greek royal family was German, you know. All the royal families of Europe were German in before the Second World War, except what? Montenegro, something like that. They're all German. Okay. Yes, his name was Battenberg, or Mountbatten, to translate it into English. And it was decided, for some reason, that the royal family of Britain had to have surnames. Silly idea. But the surname chosen was Windsor. Yeah, not their name. Saxe-Coburg-Gotha is their name. Because British royal family is German too. But Prince Philip was quite put out about that. He said, "I'm nothing more than amoeba. I'm the only father in Britain who cannot give his children his name." Bourbon, an Italian monarchy, not Germanic descent. Well, the Bourbons were gone by 1914. The Italians, I guess they were still there. So, yes, there'd be one exception. G.C. Stell says, "I never knew Prince Philip. After hearing his comments, I now miss him." Stoke equals slough or slow. Jogokin 666. Yes. Worst places. Stoke. Is that the place that John Betjeman wrote a famous poem, which he called on the Germans to destroy it with bombs? Okay, so just let me open a couple of things here, and we'll get to the book club. This is a really good book, The Children of Men, which was published in 1992, and it is set in our year of 2021. P.D. James was born in 1920 and died in 2014. She is best known as a detective novelist, but she wrote other things, including the dystopian novel of which we're going to speak today. She is often confused with the still living female detective novelist, Ruth Rendell. Another reason being that they were both made baronesses or life peers. P.D. James is a much better writer than Ruth Rendell. Her command of the English language is superb. She is an outstanding stylist. P.D. James was forced to leave school at 16 in order to provide for her family. And she worked clerical work. She got married during the war to an army doctor who returned home and was crazy and spent, from 1945 until his death, quite some years later, 1964, he was in and out of institutions and not capable of providing for the family. So P.D. James, the P.D. stands for Phyllis Dorothy. I suspect that she used the initials because the idea that a woman could write detective novels was considered somewhat risible at the time. Although for 20 years or more, there's been this cult for feminist detective stories. Boy, that just sounds like the funnest thing in the world, doesn't it? P.D. James worked as a civil servant for many years and rose pretty high in the civil service. She finally thought that she could make enough money solely from her writing to retire from government work in 1979. A couple of other things to know about her, that she was an Anglican of the old school, and she took it pretty seriously. And she was also a conservative, formally a conservative. She sat in the House of Lords as a conservative, unlike Ruth Rendell, who sat in the House of Lords as a Labour peer. There have been, innumerable television adaptations of P.D. James' detective stories. There is also a film from the acclaimed Mexican director Alfonso Cuarón of The Children of Men, which I do not recommend because it is paused to death. See, the film is all about the plight of refugees. And even though that there is a noble black heroine in the novel, The Children of Men, the producers of the movie decided that it just wasn't black enough. Just wasn't black enough. Because it's got to be made blackety black, black, black. So I do not recommend that. Apparently, P.D. James had no problem with the movie. Perhaps she took the position that I've been paid handsomely for the rights to this. And the movie, especially if it is a success, will sell even more of my books. So it is not in my interest to badmouth it. Or perhaps she was simply a very polite woman. This novel, Children of Men, it's about fecundity, or the lack of it. I suppose there's several other novels similar to this. Brian Aldiss wrote one. Frank Herbert's The White Plague. Anthony Burgess's The Wanting Seed from 1961 is rather similar as well. We are commanded in the book of Genesis to be fruitful and multiply. This novel is set in a near future where there is no more multiplication because all the men in the earth have become sterile. The procreation is no longer possible. And there was a final generation of children who are called the Omegas, from the Greek alphabet, meaning the end. And they are, rather similar to millennials, I suppose. They are, cosseted. They are the last ones, so we must give them everything that they want. There is much that in this novel which is obviously a commentary on conditions in England in 1992. I should point out that's obviously one of the reasons that the movie version was so very different, because this is explicitly an English novel. And it is steeped in, English geography, particularly that around Oxford. It is steeped in English history and English liturgical tradition. It had obviously become obvious to P.D. James when she wrote this novel that procreation and childbirth had come to be seen, particularly by the elite, as atavistic and even obscene. One of the themes of this novel is that women have a gift that men do not, which is they bear children. It's typical of modern women to consider this to be a burden and not a joy, a curse, not a blessing. But why do we do anything that we do? This is one of the questions of the novel. What's the point of getting up in the morning? What's the point of living? What's the point of working? What's the point of, history, scholarship, beautifying things, building houses, keeping them? Well, it's for the future, isn't it? And the future is expressed through children, through our children, if we're lucky enough to have them, or through other children, if we aren't. If there's to be no children, then what's the point? What is the point of life? And this novel begins very arrestingly, and I'll read from it. Just let me change the font size here. This is from a diary by our protagonist, who is called Theo, short for Professor Dr. Theodore Farron, who teaches at Oxford. And he has begun a diary, the first day of which is the 1st of January 2021. Early this morning, 1 January 2021, 3 minutes after midnight, the last human being to be born on Earth was killed in a pub brawl in a suburb of Buenos Aires, aged 25 years, 2 months, and 12 days. If the first reports are to be believed, Joseph Ricardo died as he had lived. The distinction, if one can call it that, of being the last human whose birth was officially recorded, unrelated as it was to any personal virtue or talent, had always been difficult for him to handle, and now he is dead. The news was given to us here in Britain on the 9 o'clock program of the state radio service, and I heard it fortuitously. I had settled down to begin this diary of the last half of my life when I noticed the time and thought I might as well catch the headlines to the 9 o'clock bulletin. Ricardo's death was the last item mentioned, and then only briefly. A couple of sentences delivered without emphasis in the newscaster's carefully non-committal voice. But it seemed to me, hearing it, that it was a small additional justification for beginning the diary today, the first day of a new year and my 50th birthday. As a child, I had always liked that distinction, despite the inconvenience of having it follow Christmas too quickly, so that one present, it never seemed notably superior to the one I would in any case have received, had to do for both celebrations. He asked, what possible interest can there be in the journal of Theodore Farron, Doctor of Philosophy, Fellow of Merton College in the University of Oxford, historian of the Victorian age, divorced, childless, solitary, whose only claim to notice is that he is cousin to Zand Lipiad, the dictator and warden of England. The name warden has a much different connotation in America than it does in England. You think of warden, you think of prison warden. Well, in England, what you would think of, say, church warden and other other uses of the word which do not have nasty connotations. No additional personal record is in any case necessary. All over the world, nation states are preparing to store their testimony for the posterity, which we can still occasionally convince ourselves may follow us. Those creatures from another planet who may land on this green wilderness and ask what kind of sentient life once inhabited it. Our hero, if he may be called that, Theo Farron, is not a likable man, not in the slightest. He is a very selfish man. He lives for his own convenience and his comfort. And his life, the government, the dictatorship, is his life writ large, because it's all about, safety, security, and comfort. That is what the government is officially given over to, because there is no future. And again, this is quite prescient that you see with you see with what, the last 3 generations, this obsession, with comfort, that the future is meaningless. We live in a stochastic universe. So let's just make ourselves as comfortable as we can. Let's just spend the money while we have it. No point leaving it for, those who follow us, our children, because, you can't take it with you. Got to spend it. Well, you can. Theo had been married, and it was an unfortunate marriage because he'd married the daughter of someone higher up than him in the hierarchy at Oxford. And she was a student as well. And he had thought that because she was an Oxford student, that must mean that she is clever. And he could have conversations, intelligent conversations with her. And he hadn't realized that, well, great pains had been taken to get this woman 3 A levels so that she could, it wouldn't be a scandal for her to be an Oxford student. She simply got her place at Oxford because of who her father was. And it turns out that he never really liked his wife all that much, and she never really liked him that much either. And the marriage came aground when, once and for all, when, as he says, he killed his daughter. It was an accident that he was driving his car backwards down the driveway, and his daughter, quite young daughter, who was supposed to be in the care of his mother, darted to the back of the car, and he ran her over and killed her. And he describes how, after this had happened, he was so shocked that he couldn't get out of the car. He lost all strength. And meanwhile, one of the neighbors was pounding on the window, demanding that he get out, calling him a murderer. And his wife, Helena, clearly regarded him as a murderer. And we learned near the beginning that his wife had recently left him for a much younger man, 12 years younger, very sporty young man who played rugby and made a living designing book jackets and posters. But I have to say that P.D. James has a remarkable insight into male psychology. There's a very strong tendency among women to think that men are just like them. They are not like women. Men understand very well that women are not like them, but a great deal of women think that men think like they do, and they do not. Here is I want to give you an example of her, P.D. James's wonderful prose, and also of her psychological insight. Today, Helena rang after breakfast and invited me to tea to see Matilda's kittens. I'll have more on that later. After Helena's call, I switched on the radio to listen to the 8 o'clock news. Hearing the date broadcast, I realized for the first time that it is exactly 1 year today since she left me for Rupert. It is perhaps an appropriate day for my first visit to their home. I write home instead of house because I'm sure that is how Helena would describe it, dignifying a commonplace edifice in North Oxford with the sacramental importance of shared love and shared washing up, commitment to total honesty and to a well-balanced diet, a new hygienic kitchen, and hygienic sex twice a week. I wonder about the sex, half deploring my prurience, but telling myself, hang on just a second, but telling myself that my curiosity is both natural and permissible. After all, Rupert is now enjoying, or perhaps failing to enjoy, the body which I once knew almost as intimately as I know my own. A failed marriage is the most humiliating confirmation of the transitory seduction of the flesh. Lovers can explore every line, every curve and hollow of the beloved's body, can together reach the height of inexpressible ecstasy, yet how little it matters when love or lust at last dies, and we are left with disputed possessions, lawyers' bills, the sad detritus of the lumber room, when the house chosen, furnished, possessed with enthusiasm and hope has become a prison, when faces are set in lines of peevish resentment, and bodies no longer desired are observed in all their imperfections with a dispassionate and disenchanted eye. I wonder whether Helena talks to Rupert about what went on between us in bed. I imagine so. Not to would require greater self-control and greater delicacy than I have ever seen in her. There is a streak of vulgarity in Helena's carefully nurtured social respectability, and I can imagine what she would tell him. Theo thought he was a wonderful lover, but it was all technique. You'd think he'd learned it from a sex manual, and he never talked to me, not really talked. I could be any woman. I can imagine the words because I know that they are justified. I did her more harm than she did me, even if we take out of the calculation my killing of her only child. Then he explains, as I explained earlier, why he married this woman. So, why Matilda's kittens? Well, Matilda is the cat that Theo and Helena formerly shared. Well, she got the cat. And in the absence of children, there are child substitutes. Pets are one. And we have christenings, baptisms for pets. We learn in this novel that in 2021, the Archbishop of Canterbury is now a woman. And what the Anglican Church stands for, everything and nothing, which I suppose is not much of an exaggeration of what the Anglican Church stood for in 1992. There is a fetish made of stuffed animals or dolls, very expensive dolls, and they're pushed about in prams, and they're treated as children. Now, of course, in 1992, the term fur baby had not yet been coined, but clearly James had noticed even then how people were replacing children, which are not tractable, with pets, which are. England in this novel is a dictatorship, which is run by Theo's first cousin, Zan. We see the use of the technique of the doppelganger twice in this novel. The similarities between the two first cousins and the jealousy between them. They were closer than first cousins, actually, because it turns out that Theo's mother didn't like him very much, was keen to not have him around. He was always considered to be a disappointment for some reason, even though he got into Oxford. And so he spent all the holidays, the school holidays, from about the age of, 12, until he graduated from Oxford at the grand house of Zan's father, who was a baronet. The fact that his Theo's mother's sister had married a baronet was a cause of endless pain to his mother. So you see this closeness between them. You see the similarity between them. But again, Theo, right from the beginning, has been a man who seems to be incapable of love, incapable of any kind of closeness. And he writes a great deal in his diaries about his relationship with Zan. That Zan was never really a friend. They were never really friends. They were rather, as the saying goes, alone together. Zan kept up with his first cousin, and there is a council that runs England in a dictatorial fashion. And Theo had been an advisor to the council, but he had quit some years before the beginning of this novel for several reasons. One of the, perhaps the most important being, is that Theo didn't believe that effort would accomplish anything. We have as I say, we have a government devoted to comfort and the annihilation of boredom. And thus there are government pornography outlets. There is also euthanasia is, suicide is greatly encouraged. And as far as that goes, the euthanasia, it's sort of voluntary, much like, P.D. James obviously saw that euthanasia was going to go the Dutch route. Oh, yes, it's involuntary, except when it isn't. There is a horrifying spectacle called the quietus, in which all these oldies are gathered together at the seaside and drowned at once. It's people need these ceremonies, and religion has pretty much disappeared. And there are various faith healers. There you have a hellfire and brimstone preacher, and you have an opposite, a woman, Rosie, who teaches that God is love, any kind of love, of anything or anything. I make no judgments. And again, quite prescient. We have this is a typical story of a hero. He's an unlikely hero, our Theo. That by chance he runs into a student, a former student of his, a very transitory student, one lecture. And she wants something of him. And she has found out that he is the first cousin to the warden or dictator of England. And there are unpleasant things happening in the country. There's the quietus, there's the government pornography centers. In a rather escape from New York-like situation, all criminals upon second offense are dumped on the Isle of Man, where they make their own hell. Now, the question of the upkeep of England is a very serious one, because if you have no young people, who is going to do the work, particularly the physical work? Well, they're imported from abroad. Black people from the Caribbean, presumably. They're called sojourners, and they do their stint, and they are sent back home. They are not allowed to stay. They are not allowed to bring their families. There is much about what has happened in the future in this novel which is not made clear. Yes, your friends, your family. I haven't any family. My parents were killed in the race riots in 2002. So says Julie. Her name isn't Julie. Her name is Julian. It was a mistake. She is the would-be Eve of this story. It is also intimated that much of the world in 2021 has been gutted by racial conflict. Let's see, we have a system extending from this council down to local councils, which retains a vestige of democracy for those few who still care. We have a humane direction of labor, which pays some regard to individual wishes and talents, and which ensures that people continue to work, even though they have no posterity to inherit the rewards of their labor. Despite the inevitable desire to spend, to acquire, to satisfy immediate wants, we have sound money and low inflation. We have plans that will ensure that the last generation, fortunate enough to live in the multiracial boarding house we call Britain, will have stored food, necessary medicines, light, water, and power. Beside these achievements, does the country greatly care that some sojourners are discontented, that some of the aged choose to die in company, that the man penal colony isn't pacified? So says Zan, the warden of England. I don't know, perhaps out of boredom, which is the imp of the perverse, or a romantic attraction, Theo becomes involved in a radical group that Julian, the woman Julian, is involved with. And then we see another use of the Dostoevskian doppelganger, the leader of the soi-disant revolutionaries, as an unpleasant, forceful young man called Rolf, who is married to Julian, the woman. Now, Theo knows that he's acting perversely in becoming involved with these people at all, or continuing to be involved with them in any way, or increasing his involvement. But we see that, I suppose he's reached the conclusion that, it's better to feel alive, to feel that one is doing something useful. Julian, it turns out, is a Christian. There is an Anglican priest in the group of revolutionaries, a man named Luke, who is a Book of Common Prayer man. Theo had imbibed all of this, memorized much of it as a young man, but he cares not for religion or for the idea of God. And it seems to me that in a world that is condemned to die, as the England of 2021 is, it seems a reasonable reaction. We start off with the diaries, Theo's diaries, and then we get more standard novelistic chapters about him, written in third person. Eventually, action takes precedence, and this becomes a story. It becomes a story of an unlikely group, ragtag, if you will, not looking to take down a government, but to survive for a very specific purpose. This is a mystery story, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but I will say that the novel ends in a Christian gesture. I found this to be an absolutely extraordinary book. As I say, it is beautifully written. It is tremendously thoughtful. My own experience, whenever I finish a great book, I find that, I'm excited and distracted for several hours afterwards. And certainly this was the case with P.D. James, The Life of Man. Let's have a final look at the chat. Halper says the IRA bomber who killed Lord Mountbatten got out of prison in 1998. The movie is paused, says Bob Paxson. Yeah, it's got Clive Owen in it. I like Clive Owen quite a bit. Ogan's Iron says Germanics established themselves as nobility everywhere in Western Europe. Learned recently that some Roman aristocrats assimilated to Germanicness, took Germanic names, dress. Okay. Oh, we're talking about dinner now, are we? Oh, I know Hikma Warrior likes to talk about food. Okay, the Bourbons are Frankish, says Yo Mama. Oh, yes, there's some story going around that Emmanuel Macron apparently raging against the Germans and the Poles and such like. Apparently, he's forgotten about the Frankish kingdom. He says that he complains about the shape of Polish heads, saying that they're all closeted homosexuals. I don't know whether this story is true or not, but I can say Emmanuel Macron is the fellow. You could look up his, let's say, very close relationship with one of his staffers, one of his male staffers. He married a woman old enough to be his mother, who had been his teacher. Her daughters are older than him. And of course, there were those embarrassing photographs from the Caribbean a few years ago where he was naked from the waist up, holding all of these black men naked from the waist up very closely, like this. Yeah, he's not fooling me. He's not fooling me. Not a bit of it. Quachalango says, has KMG ever read Julian Cope's Krautrock Sampler? Indeed, indeed. Julian Cope is one of the, eternal nutters, if you like, of Britain. I quite liked his solo career in the 1980s, World Shut Your Mouth and such like. I noticed that he seemed to have been infuriated by the success of the Smiths, dismissing it as, polecat music. Let's talk about what's coming up on the show next week. Yes, on Monday, I'm going to be talking about Krautrock, a primer. On Theater Thursday next week, Adam Curtis's multi-segmented documentary from this year, Can't Get You Out of My Head. A week after that, Parasite by Bong Joon-ho. Week after that, April 29th, Berlin, Alexanderplatz by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. And on May 6th, Doug Lyman's Go. The book club next week is The Dictatorship of Woke Capital by Stephen Sukup. And April 23rd, Unmasked, which is about Antifa by Andy No. April 30th, a terrifying novel about China called An Excess Mail by Maggie Shen King. And on May the 7th, Dynasty by Tom Holland, which is a sequel to his book Rubicon, which I previously talked about on the book club. That's it for today and this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I shall be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you liked the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a contribution to this live stream, which is be greatly appreciated at this time of great uncertainty in my life, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.